Long before numbers were written down, before symbols were pressed into clay or inked onto paper, human life moved at a slower rhythm. People lived close to what they needed. Food, shelter, warmth, and safety shaped most decisions. Exchange existed, but it was personal. One person knew another. A favor remembered was as important as an object exchanged. Memory carried value. In small groups, this worked. A hunter shared meat. A gatherer offered fruit. Someone repaired tools. Someone watched children. Balance was informal and flexible. If one person gave more today, it was understood that another day would come when they received more. Trust was local. Time was patient. As groups grew larger, memory began to fail. Not because people became careless, but because there were simply too many interactions to hold in the mind. A village might remember who helped whom last season. A town could not. When strangers met, there was no shared past to rely on. Barter emerged as a direct solution. One thing for another. Grain for pottery, fish for cloth. It felt fair because it was visible. You could see what you gave and what you received. Nothing was hidden. But barter carried quiet difficulties. Needs rarely aligned at the same moment. A farmer might need tools long before harvest. A potter might not need grain at all. Value shifted with seasons, weather, and personal circumstance. What was useful today could be useless tomorrow. Over time, certain goods began to appear again and again in exchanges. Items that lasted. Items that could be divided. Items that were widely desired, even if not immediately needed. Salt was one of them. It preserved food. It traveled well. It did not spoil easily. In some places, it became so central that wages were measured in it. Livestock served a similar role. Cattle, sheep, and goats represented stored labor and future growth. They were not easy to move, but they carried social meaning and long-term value. These goods were not yet money in the modern sense. They were anchors, reference points, shared agreements about usefulness. As trade routes expanded, portability became more important. Traders traveled farther than ever before. They crossed rivers, deserts, and mountains. Carrying cattle was not practical. Carrying sacks of grain was risky. Spoilage, theft, and weight all mattered. Metals began to fill this space. At first, metal was valued for its utility. Bronze and copper made tools. Iron made stronger ones. But gradually, certain metals were valued, even when they were not shaped into anything useful. Gold and silver did not rust. They did not break easily. They could be melted and reshaped without losing their nature. Most importantly, they were scarce. Scarcity created consistency. If everyone agreed that a metal was difficult to obtain, then its presence carried meaning. A small amount could represent a large amount of labor, travel, or risk. Trust began to shift away from personal memory and toward material reliability. Early metal exchange was still informal. Pieces were weighed, not counted. A merchant carried scales. A buyer watched closely. Trust existed, but verification mattered. The metal had to be real. It had to be pure enough. Cheating was always possible, and so systems slowly formed to reduce it. The first coins did not appear suddenly. They emerged from repeated patterns. In some regions, rulers or city authorities began stamping metal pieces with marks. These marks were not decoration. They were promises. A stamp said that someone powerful stood behind the weight and purity of the metal. It said that the piece had already been measured, tested, and approved. This saved time. It reduced argument. It made trade faster and more predictable. Trust began to move again. This time not just into the metal itself, but into the authority behind the mark. Coins changed behavior quietly. People no longer needed to inspect every exchange as closely. They could accept a stamped piece and move on. Trade accelerated. Markets grew. Towns expanded. Specialization deepened. But this trust was never absolute. Coins were clipped. Edges were shaved. Impurities were added. Governments debased metal content during times of stress. Every system carried tension between trust and fear. What mattered was not perfection, but repetition. As long as most exchanges worked, confidence held. Money at this stage was not an abstract idea. It was physical. You could feel its weight. You could hear it strike stone. Loss was tangible. Wealth was heavy. Over centuries, coins spread across cultures. Each society adapted them to its own needs. Some favored silver, others gold. Some used copper for daily trade and precious metals for larger exchanges. Values shifted, but the underlying pattern remained. Money was becoming a shared language. As empires grew, coins carried more than value. They carried images, faces of rulers, symbols of gods, statements of power. A coin told you who controlled the land, the mines, and the rules of exchange. Holding money meant holding a piece of authority. This created stability and fragility at the same time. Stability because rules were clearer. Fragility because trust now depended on distant institutions rather than neighbors. Paper money would come much later, born from similar needs but greater scale. At first, paper was simply a receipt, a promise that metal existed somewhere else. It was lighter, easier to transport, more efficient. But even before paper, the essential shift had already happened. Money was no longer just an object. It was a system of belief. People accepted coins not because they needed the metal immediately, but because they trusted others would accept them later. This belief required social cohesion, enforcement, and memory beyond any individual. Fear played a quiet role. Fear of being left with something no one wanted. Fear of counterfeit. Fear of sudden change. These fears shaped rules, punishments, and customs. Human behavior adapted slowly. People learned to save, to hoard, to lend, and to borrow. They learned patience and calculation. They learned that value could exist without immediate use. Money allowed time to stretch. A farmer could store labor across seasons. A builder could plan years ahead. A state could fund projects beyond a single lifetime. But it also introduced new forms of anxiety. Loss could now occur without fire or famine. A coin lost was gone forever. As systems grew more complex, distance increased between creation and trust. Fewer people understood where money came from. More people simply accepted that it worked. Throughout history, money has always rested on the same quiet foundation. Shared belief, repetition, memory extended through objects and symbols. It did not replace human trust. It transformed it. Where once trust lived in faces and stories, it moved into metal, marks, and later paper. Each shift brought efficiency and distance, connection and abstraction. The invention of money was not a single moment. It was a long unfolding, a series of small decisions made by ordinary people trying to make exchange easier, safer, and more predictable. It continues to evolve, not through sudden invention, but through slow adjustment. And beneath every form it has taken, the same human patterns remain. Desire for stability, fear of uncertainty, the need to believe that what we hold today will still matter tomorrow. These patterns move quietly through time, shaping systems that outlast the hands that first imagined them. As metal coins became familiar, their presence began to shape daily life in subtle ways. Markets organized themselves around regular exchange. Prices settled into ranges that felt stable, even though nothing about nature itself had changed. A loaf of bread still required the same grain and labor, but now its value could be expressed without reference to the baker or the harvest. A number replaced a story. This separation mattered. When value could be detached from personal history, trade became impersonal. Not cold, but neutral. Two people did not need to know each other. They did not need to remember past favors. The coin carried the memory for them. Over time, this allowed communities to grow larger than trust alone would permit. Travelers could arrive from distant places and participate immediately. Craftspeople could sell their work without knowing who would buy it. Soldiers could be paid without being fed by the towns they passed through. Money reduced friction, but it also reduced familiarity. In early cities, money changed the rhythm of days. Work could be measured more precisely. Time itself began to feel segmented. A day's labor could now be exchanged for a fixed amount, rather than negotiated through relationships. This brought clarity but also pressure. People began to think in terms of accumulation. Not simply survival, but surplus. Extra coins meant stored effort. Stored effort meant options, security during bad seasons, freedom to move, the ability to refuse unfair treatment. Yet accumulation also created imbalance. Some gathered more than they needed. Others fell behind. The old systems of obligation weakened. A hungry neighbor could no longer rely on shared memory alone. Payment replaced gratitude. Societies responded in different ways. Some imposed limits, some taxed, some redistributed. Others allowed inequality to widen. There was no single solution, only ongoing adjustment. Money did not create these tensions, but it made them visible. As trade expanded beyond cities into regions and empires, standardization became essential. A coin accepted in one place had to be trusted elsewhere. Weight systems were aligned. Purity standards were enforced. Punishments for counterfeiting became severe, not because metal was sacred, but because trust was fragile. When trust failed, trade slowed. Markets emptied. Hoarding increased. Fear traveled faster than goods. Rulers learned that stability depended less on wealth itself and more on confidence in the system. This lesson was learned repeatedly. In some eras, new coins were introduced to restore faith. In others, old ones were recalled. Sometimes the image on the coin mattered as much as the metal. Familiar symbols reassured people that continuity remained. Money, in this sense, became a psychological tool as much as an economic one. It shaped expectations. It anchored behavior. It allowed strangers to coordinate without speaking. As centuries passed, written records became more common. Accounts were kept. Debts were tracked. Promises were formalized. Money began to exist not only as an object, but as an entry in a ledger. This was another quiet shift. A person could owe without holding anything. A person could be owed without seeing payment. Trust moved again, this time into writing, into institutions, into shared rules about enforcement and time. Interest emerged naturally from this environment, not as exploitation at first, but as compensation for delay and risk. Lending meant uncertainty. Time passed. Circumstances changed. Interest reflected that reality. Different cultures viewed this differently. Some embraced it. Some restricted it. Some moralized it. But the underlying behavior remained consistent. Humans recognized that time had value. Money made time visible. With this visibility came new forms of planning. Long-term projects became possible. Roads, canals, walls, and cities were built through pooled resources. No single person could have funded them. Money allowed coordination at scale, but scale introduced distance. Decisions were made far from their consequences. Coins paid for labor, but did not ensure fairness. Systems grew efficient, not necessarily humane. This tension persisted. As money systems matured, people became accustomed to abstraction. Children grew up seeing coins as normal, unquestioned. They did not ask why metal had value. It simply did. The system preceded them. When systems feel permanent, they become invisible. Yet history shows that no form of money remains unchanged forever. Materials shift. Authorities rise and fall. Trust is tested repeatedly. What remains constant is adaptation. Whenever money fails to reflect shared belief, alternatives appear. Barter returns temporarily. New standards emerge. Old ones are revised. The cycle is slow but persistent. Throughout all of this, money remains a mirror. It reflects how much a society trusts itself, how it balances individual freedom with collective stability, how it understands time, labor, and obligation. It is neither good nor bad by nature. It is shaped by use, by beliefs, by repetition. The invention of money did not simplify human life. It reorganized it. And as it continued to evolve, quietly and incrementally, it carried forward the same ancient concerns that existed long before the first coin was struck. The desire to exchange without conflict, to plan beyond the present moment, to trust without knowing. These desires remain, moving beneath the surface, unchanged even as the forms that express them continue to shift. As money became more abstract, its presence reached into areas of life that had once been governed almost entirely by custom. Marriage agreements, inheritance, compensation for harm, and obligations between families began to include monetary terms. These practices did not erase older traditions, but they layered over them. A payment could now settle what once required mediation, apology, or long remembrance. This altered how conflict was resolved. Instead of endless retaliation, a fixed amount could close a dispute. The idea was not forgiveness, but finality. Money offered an ending. It placed a boundary around loss and said, this much and no more. In this way, money acted as a social stabilizer. It reduced cycles of revenge. It allowed people to move forward without carrying unresolved claims across generations. But it also reduced the role of emotion. Grief could be priced. Injury could be quantified. Not everyone accepted this easily. Resistance appeared wherever money entered spaces once held by ritual or kinship. Some saw it as cold, others as necessary. Most adapted without fully approving or rejecting it. Adaptation was often quiet. As economies grew, so did the complexity of exchange. Not every transaction could be settled immediately. Harvests were seasonal. Journeys took time. Goods moved slowly. Credit filled the gaps. At first, credit was deeply personal. A lender knew the borrowers. Reputation mattered. Memory still played a role. A broken promise carried social cost. But as trade expanded, credit detached from faces. It became transferable. Debts could be sold. Obligations could move between hands. The original relationship faded, replaced by contract. This shift required trust in enforcement rather than character. Courts emerged to settle disputes. Written law replaced oral agreement. Money and authority intertwined more tightly. To protect the system, power centralized. With centralization came record-keeping. Tallies, ledgers, and archives preserved obligations beyond a single lifetime. Money began to exist more on paper than in hand, even before paper currency was common. A person's worth in certain contexts became something that could be recorded, compared, and audited. This did not define the person, but it influenced how institutions treated them. Throughout history, moments of disruption tested these systems. Wars interrupted trade. Natural disasters destroyed reserves. Rulers overextended resources. In such times, trust weakened. When trust weakened, people returned to what felt solid. Food, land, tools, community. Money's value narrowed to what it could directly secure. After disruption passed, systems rebuilt, often with adjustments, new standards, new authorities, sometimes new materials. These cycles repeated across centuries, across continents. What persisted was the human tendency to seek continuity. Even when systems failed, people looked for familiar structures, something to anchor exchange, something to stand in for trust when trust itself was strained. Money served that role imperfectly, but persistently. As writing spread more widely, contracts became common. Agreements could extend far into the future. A promise could outlive the people who made it. Institutions inherited obligations. Continuity became institutional rather than personal. This allowed societies to plan beyond individual lifespans. It also created distance between action and consequence. When money flows through layers of authority, responsibility can blur. Yet most daily use remained simple. A purchase, a wage, a tax. These ordinary exchanges formed the foundation of larger systems. They were repetitive, predictable, and often unnoticed. It is in repetition that money gains its power. When an action is performed thousands of times without incident, it becomes trusted. When trust becomes habitual, questioning fades. Money does not demand belief loudly. It becomes background. This background presence shapes behavior subtly. People measure efforts. They compare options. They delay gratification. They imagine futures that extend beyond immediate needs. Money makes abstraction livable. At the same time, it creates new forms of vulnerability. Loss no longer requires physical destruction. A record altered, a promise broken, a system mismanaged can erase value without visible damage. This invisibility can be unsettling. Throughout history, people have oscillated between confidence and caution. Periods of expansion bring optimism. Periods of contraction bring restraint. Money reflects these moods rather than causing them. It absorbs fear and hope alike. As centuries passed, the materials and forms of money continued to change, but the underlying function remained steady: to coordinate human effort across time and space, to store trust when direct trust was impractical. Every generation inherits a system it did not design. Most accept it, some challenge it, a few reshape it, but the rhythm remains slow. Money evolves not through sudden insight, but through gradual accommodation. One small change accepted, then another. Over time, the system looks entirely different, though no single moment feels decisive. This is how the invention of money truly unfolded. Not as a breakthrough, but as a quiet accumulation of choices made in response to practical needs. Those needs remain. People continue to seek ways to exchange without conflict, to plan without certainty, to cooperate beyond familiarity. Money remains one of the tools used for that purpose. Imperfect, adaptable, and deeply human in its origins, its story does not end. It simply continues, carried forward by the same patterns of trust, fear, memory, and belief that shaped it from the beginning. As money settled into daily life, its presence began to influence how people understood obligation. In earlier times, obligation was personal. It lived in memory and reputation. To fail someone was to damage a relationship that might last a lifetime. When money became the medium, obligation became transferable. A debt could move from one person to another without emotion. What mattered was fulfillment, not familiarity. This altered the nature of accountability. A promise backed by money no longer required affection or respect. It required enforcement. This shift supported growth, but it also introduced distance. People could now interact repeatedly without ever knowing one another. Trust became systemic rather than relational. For many, this was freeing. A person could leave their place of birth. They could work among strangers. They could rebuild elsewhere without carrying the full weight of past ties. Money made mobility possible. It allowed lives to be rearranged. But mobility came at a cost. Communities loosened. Long-term mutual dependence weakened. Where once survival required cooperation within a fixed group, money allowed independence. People no longer needed to rely on the same neighbors year after year. This independence reshaped social expectations. Help could be purchased. Labor could be hired. Services could replace favors. Over time, the line between generosity and transaction blurred. Some relationships became simpler. Others became thinner. Money did not eliminate kindness, but it changed how kindness was expressed. As states expanded, money became essential to governance. Taxes funded administration, defense, and infrastructure. Instead of demanding labor directly, authorities collected value and redirected it. This abstraction allowed rulers to govern larger populations with fewer direct demands. People paid not because they knew where every coin went, but because systems required compliance. Authority shifted from visible force to structured obligation. This required legitimacy. When people believed the system was stable and predictable, compliance followed naturally. When belief weakened, resistance grew. History records many moments where trust in money and trust in authority failed together. In those moments, money's fragility became visible. Yet even then, alternatives did not erase money entirely. They existed alongside it. Informal exchange returned. Barter reappeared in limited spaces. But as soon as stability returned, structured money systems reasserted themselves. They always did. This persistence reveals something fundamental. Money answers a recurring human need. Not for wealth alone, but for coordination. It allows large numbers of people to align effort without constant negotiation. Coordination reduces conflict. When rules are shared and values are standardized, friction decreases. People know what to expect. Predictability lowers anxiety. Even an imperfect system can feel safer than uncertainty. Over generations, money became woven into identity. People measured progress through it. Success and failure acquired numeric expression. Life milestones gained monetary markers. This did not define human worth, but it influenced perception. A person with resources could delay hardship. A person without them faced immediacy. Money stretched time for some and compressed it for others. This unevenness has always existed, but money made it visible and persistent. Still, it is important to remember that money itself does nothing. It sits, it waits, it moves only when directed. It reflects priorities rather than creating them. When societies valued conquest, money funded armies. When they valued trade, money built ships. When they valued knowledge, money supported scholars. The form changed, but the mechanism remained neutral. Money follows intention. Across long stretches of history, there were periods where people believed their system was final, that no further change was needed. These beliefs rarely lasted. New pressures emerged. New tools were required. Metal gave way to paper. Paper to records. Records to systems increasingly abstract. Each step reduced physical presence and increased reliance on trust in structure. With abstraction came efficiency, but also opacity. Fewer people understood the full system. Most interacted with a small part and assumed the rest functioned properly. This assumption is necessary for large systems to operate. Complete understanding is not required. Belief in continuity is enough. Money at its core is continuity made tangible, a way to carry effort from one moment to another, from one place to another, from one person to another. It bridges gaps that human memory alone cannot hold. That is why, despite its changes, money remains recognizable across centuries. Its forms evolve, but its purpose remains steady: to make cooperation possible at scale. As time moves forward, new forms will emerge. They will feel unfamiliar at first. They will provoke debate. Some will fail, others will endure. But they will arise from the same quiet pressures that shaped the first exchanges. The need to trust beyond proximity, to plan beyond immediacy, to remember beyond the limits of individual lives. These pressures do not disappear. They move patiently through history, shaping systems that seem complex on the surface, yet rest on simple human needs beneath. And so the story continues, not as a finished arc, but as an ongoing process, unfolding slowly, shaped by countless small decisions made by people seeking order in an uncertain world. As money systems became more deeply embedded, people began to relate to them not as inventions, but as surroundings. Like weather or terrain, money became something that existed rather than something that was made. Children grew up learning its symbols before understanding its origins. Adults organized their lives around it without revisiting why it worked. This forgetting was not accidental. It was functional. For a system to endure, it must fade into the background. Constant questioning would slow exchange. Familiarity allowed speed. Speed allowed scale. Yet beneath this familiarity, unease never fully disappeared. Across history, people have sensed that money is both solid and fragile. Solid when accepted, fragile when questioned. This tension produced customs meant to reinforce trust. Rituals, formal ceremonies, legal language, visible authority. The more abstract money became, the more symbolic reinforcement it required. Seals, signatures, and later stamps and serial marks were not merely technical. They were psychological. They reassured people that someone was responsible, that someone was watching. Responsibility mattered. When systems felt accountable, trust held. When responsibility seemed distant or unclear, suspicion grew. People watched closely for signs of imbalance. Shortages, sudden changes, inconsistencies. Even small disruptions could ripple outward. History records many moments when confidence shifted quietly before collapsing visibly. At first, people hesitated. They delayed exchange. They held back. Trade slowed not because goods vanished, but because belief wavered. Money depends on motion. When it stops moving, it loses meaning. When people hoard, circulation slows. When circulation slows, systems strain. Authorities respond with reassurance, reform, or force. Outcomes vary. Yet even in failure, money leaves traces. Records remain. Habits persist. People remember how exchange once worked and seek to restore it in altered form. Rarely does a society abandon structured exchange entirely. The costs are too high. Instead, systems are repaired, replaced, or layered. Layering is common. Old forms coexist with new ones. Coins circulate alongside notes. Notes alongside records. Records alongside promises. Each layer adds convenience for some and complexity for others. This layering reflects human caution. New systems are tested gradually. Trust is earned through repetition, not decree. Over long periods, this gradualism gives the impression of continuity, even when foundations shift. Money in this way is always both old and new. It carries the memory of past agreements while adapting to present needs. Its symbols change, but its role remains recognizable. People continue to use it to measure effort, to delay reward, to transfer obligation. These functions remain central because human limitations remain unchanged. Memory fades. Trust weakens with distance. Time introduces uncertainty. Money compensates for these limits. It does not eliminate them. It manages them. This management has consequences. It encourages planning. It encourages comparison. It encourages restraint and risk in different measures. It shapes institutions and personal choices alike. Yet it never acts alone. Behind every monetary system lies a social agreement, explicit or implicit. When that agreement aligns with lived experience, systems feel stable. When it diverges, tension accumulates. Throughout history, adjustment follows tension, sometimes slowly through reform, sometimes abruptly through collapse, often through a mixture of both, but always through human response rather than mechanical inevitability. Money does not decide. People do. They decide what to accept, what to reject, what to trust, what to fear. These decisions, multiplied across millions of lives, shape the trajectory of systems that appear impersonal from a distance. Seen this way, the invention of money is not a technical achievement. It is a social one. It reflects how people choose to cooperate when direct trust is insufficient, how they externalize memory, how they negotiate uncertainty across time. These choices continue to be made, quietly, every day. Not in moments of invention, but in moments of use. A hand receiving payment. A record being written. A promise being honored or broken. Each small action reinforces or weakens the system slightly. Over time, these small shifts accumulate. And so money persists, not because it is perfect, but because it remains useful enough, flexible enough, familiar enough. It adapts as people adapt. It changes as societies change. And beneath every form it takes, the same simple purpose endures: to allow people to move forward together, even when they do not know one another, even when the future is uncertain, and even when memory alone is not enough to hold everything that must be carried forward. As time moved on, money began to shape not only exchange, but expectation. People came to rely on regularity. Wages arrived at known intervals. Prices settled into familiar ranges. Obligations followed calendars. This predictability reduced uncertainty, even when life itself remained uncertain. Regularity has a calming effect. When outcomes feel measurable, anxiety softens. People adjust behavior to match patterns. They plan not because the future is guaranteed, but because it feels structured. Money provided that structure. It allowed effort to be broken into units. Large tasks could be divided. Long projects could be funded incrementally. Risk could be spread across many hands rather than resting on one. This distribution of risk changed how societies approached ambition. Where once only kings or clans could attempt large undertakings, pooled resources made broader participation possible. Harbors, roads, irrigation systems, and public buildings emerged from collective contribution. Money acted as a coordinating signal, aligning many small efforts toward a shared result. Yet coordination always required oversight. Someone had to count. Someone had to record. Someone had to enforce. These roles grew in importance as systems expanded. Administrators, clerks, and accountants became essential, even if rarely celebrated. Their work was quiet, repetitive, exacting. Accuracy mattered more than creativity. A small error repeated many times could distort outcomes. Trust rested on precision. As record-keeping improved, abstraction deepened. Value moved further from physical form. A mark on parchment could represent more than a chest of coins. Authority rested increasingly on symbols rather than substance. This shift required faith in continuity. People accepted that the system tomorrow would resemble the system today, that records would be honored, that obligations would persist. Without this belief, abstraction would collapse. Faith did not require certainty. It required habits. Over generations, habit became tradition. Tradition became expectation. Expectation became norm. Money, once an innovation, became inheritance. Those born into a system rarely question its foundations. They learn its rules as part of learning how to live. Only when rules fail do foundations come into view. History shows that failure is never sudden in perception, even when it appears sudden in record. Signs appear first as discomfort, confusion, minor adjustments. People sense imbalance before they can name it. They respond cautiously, holding back, watching. Money systems register these responses immediately. Circulation slows, commitments shorten, trust narrows. In response, institutions adapt. They clarify rules. They reinforce symbols. They attempt to restore confidence. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes they do not. But even in disruption, the underlying impulse remains unchanged. People seek a medium that allows exchange without constant negotiation, that allows memory beyond the individual, that allows coordination across distance and time. Money fulfills this role imperfectly but persistently. It is shaped by law but sustained by behavior, enforced by authority but accepted by choice. It exists not in metal or paper alone, but in the shared decision to continue using it. This shared decision is renewed constantly. Every transaction affirms it. Every refusal challenges it. Over long spans of history, this renewal gives money its resilience. Not permanence, but endurance. Forms dissolve. Systems reset. But the function reappears. The path from barter to coins was not a straight line, and it did not end with coins. It was one phase in a long process of learning how to cooperate beyond immediacy. That learning continues. People remain constrained by time, distance, and limited knowledge. They still seek ways to store effort, to transfer trust, and to plan despite uncertainty. Money remains one of the tools used to meet those needs. Quietly, gradually, without final resolution. And so the story carries on, not toward an ending, but through a series of adjustments, shaped by the same human tendencies that guided the first exchanges, and will continue to guide whatever forms come next. As money continued its long presence, it began to influence how people understood fairness. In early exchange, fairness was negotiated in the moment. Faces were visible. Circumstances were known. A poor harvest in illness, a family loss could soften expectations. Exchange adjusted to context. With standardized money, fairness shifted toward equivalence. A price was a price. A wage was a wage. Context mattered less than consistency. This brought clarity, but it also narrowed flexibility. People learned to separate compassion from transaction. This separation made systems workable at scale. It also meant that hardship could persist without immediate correction. A system could be fair in structure while remaining harsh in outcome. Societies have always struggled with this tension. Some attempted to soften it through custom, charity, almsgiving, mutual aid. These practices existed alongside money, not in place of it. They acknowledged that no system of exchange could fully account for human vulnerability. Money organized exchange. Community absorbed excess strain. As money-based systems matured, people developed language to talk about value beyond survival. Comfort, security, status, leisure. These ideas gained clarity when measured. What could be counted could be compared. What could be compared could be desired. Desire expanded, not only for necessities, but for differentiation. Objects and services acquired meaning beyond use. They signaled possession, belonging, aspiration. Money became a medium not just of exchange, but of expression. This too unfolded gradually. At first, distinction was marked by lineage, role, or proximity to power. Over time, money provided an alternate signal. Portable, visible, comparable. This changed social navigation. People could now alter their standing through accumulation rather than birth alone. This possibility introduced both hope and pressure. Movement became imaginable. Stagnation became measurable. With measurement came comparison. Comparison rarely rests quietly. It introduces unease. Satisfaction becomes relative. Contentment shifts. Money did not create comparison, but it sharpened it. Still, for many, money remained practical rather than symbolic. A means to meet needs. A way to smooth daily life. Most exchanges were modest. Most concerns immediate. History often highlights extremes, but the majority of money's influence occurs in ordinary moments. A payment made on time. A purchase planned carefully. A small reserve held for uncertainty. These ordinary moments accumulate into stability. Stability does not mean absence of change. It means change that can be absorbed. Money systems aim to provide this absorption, to allow adjustment without collapse. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes they do not. When they fail, people feel it not as theory, but as disruption. Plans unravel. Expectations falter. Anxiety rises. In such times, attention returns to fundamentals. Food, shelter, trust, proximity. Money retreats temporarily from abstraction back toward immediacy. Value narrows. Exchange becomes cautious. Once stability returns, abstraction slowly rebuilds. This movement between abstraction and immediacy is recurring. It reflects the limits of human tolerance for uncertainty. When uncertainty grows too large, people simplify. When confidence returns, complexity reemerges. Money moves with this rhythm. It expands when trust is abundant. It contracts when trust is scarce. It never fully disappears because the needs it serves never disappear. Throughout all of this, the basic invention remains unchanged. A shared agreement to accept something now in exchange for something later. To believe that others will honor that acceptance in turn. This belief is renewed daily. It does not require enthusiasm, only continuities. As long as people continue to exchange, to record, to honor obligations, money persists. It does not need to be celebrated. It only needs to function. And so it continues to accompany human life, quietly shaping choices, structures, and expectations, rarely noticed until it falters, and quickly taken for granted once it steadies again. This quiet presence is perhaps its most defining feature. Money does not announce itself. It settles in. It becomes part of the background against which lives unfold, carrying forward the accumulated trust of countless past exchanges and waiting patiently for the next one. As generations passed, money became intertwined with memory in a different way. Earlier, memory lived in people. In stories told, favors remembered, obligations felt. With money, memory moved outward, into records, into marks, into systems that could outlast any single voice. This external memory allowed societies to grow older without forgetting themselves. A promise made decades earlier could still matter. An obligation could survive the people who first agreed to it. Inheritance depended on this continuity. So did long-term stewardship of land, buildings, and shared resources. Money supported permanence, but permanence required maintenance. Records had to be preserved. Rules had to be interpreted. Disputes had to be resolved. Over time, institutions emerged not to create value, but to remember it accurately. Libraries, treasuries, archives, and courts became custodians of collective memory. Their presence reinforced stability, but also distance. The further memory moved from individuals, the less personal it felt. Responsibility became procedural. Outcomes followed rules rather than relationships. This procedural nature made systems resilient, but sometimes rigid. Flexibility was still possible, but it required deliberate intervention. Laws had to be amended. Exceptions had to be justified. Compassion became formal rather than spontaneous. Money shaped this formalization without intending to. As societies adapted, they learned to live with this trade-off. Precision instead of warmth. predictability instead of intimacy. These choices were rarely made explicitly. They emerged through use. Most people experienced money not as theory, but as routine. They earned it, spent it, set aside a portion, passed some along, lost some, found themselves constrained or supported by it without reflecting on its origins. This routine gave money its power. When a system becomes routine, it stops demanding attention. Attention moves elsewhere, to family, to work, to survival. Money becomes infrastructure rather than focus. Infrastructure is noticed only when it fails. History shows that when money systems strain, people become suddenly aware of their dependence. Anxiety rises not because money is absent, but because reliability is uncertain. Uncertainty disrupts habit. In response, people simplify behavior. They shorten commitments. They seek immediacy. They favor what can be seen and held. These reactions are not irrational. They are adaptive. Once reliability returns, habits slowly resume. This pattern repeats across eras. Money systems rarely collapse entirely. They bend, fragment, or reorganize. New forms coexist with old ones. Trust rebuilds unevenly. Over time, a new normal emerges. Each normal feels permanent to those living within it. Yet from a longer view, permanence is illusion. What endures is function, not form. The function of money remains steady even as materials and mechanisms change. That function is coordination. To allow effort separated by time and distance to meet. To let strangers cooperate without constant negotiation. To store intention beyond immediate action. Money does not guarantee fairness. It does not ensure wisdom. It does not prevent error. It simply allows complexity. Complexity is both opportunity and burden. It enables specialization, growth, and innovation. It also introduces fragility, dependence, and imbalance. Societies accept this because the alternative is limitation. Small systems rely on familiarity. Large systems rely on abstraction. Money enables the latter. This shift has always been gradual. People do not wake up one day in a different system. They adjust step by step, adapting behavior to new norms as they appear. Coins once felt novel, later ordinaries. Records once felt risky, later expected. Each transition carried hesitation, then acceptance. Acceptance does not mean endorsement. It means adaptation. Most people adapt not because they approve, but because life continues. Needs remain. Exchange persists. Money, in whatever form it takes, offers a workable path. And so it remains present, moving quietly through daily routines, carrying accumulated trust forward, absorbing countless small decisions, and shaping outcomes without drawing attention to itself. It does not ask to be believed in strongly, only to be used consistently. As long as that consistency holds, money continues its slow, steady role in human life, neither central nor absent, but woven into the fabric of how people live, plan, and relate to one another across time. As money settled further into the background of life, its influence became less visible, but more pervasive. People no longer thought of exchange as something that needed explanation. It was assumed. A task completed implied payment. A price implied acceptance. Silence itself became part of the agreement. There was no need to restate the rules. They were already understood. This shared understanding reduced friction. When expectations align, interaction becomes smooth. People move through daily routines with little conscious effort. Money supports this flow by standardizing outcomes. It removes the need for constant negotiation. Yet standardization also narrows perception. When values are expressed numerically, differences appear clearer, but meanings grow thinner. A difference of amount replaces a difference of circumstance. Complexity is compressed into a figure that can be compared, but not fully explained. This compression is useful, but incomplete. People sense this intuitively. That is why money rarely stands alone. Stories, explanations, and justifications accompany it. A price may be fixed, but its fairness is often discussed. A wage may be agreed upon, but its adequacy is debated. Money provides clarity, but not closure. Across long spans of history, this incompleteness has shaped social life. People seek meaning beyond transaction. They form bonds that money cannot replace. They offer help that cannot be priced. They preserve rituals that resist calculation. These practices coexist with money rather than opposing it. They remind societies that exchange is only one dimension of human interaction. Necessary but not sufficient. Money organizes effort. Meaning organizes life. As money systems matured, people learned to navigate between these domains. They accepted transaction where efficiency mattered. They preserved tradition where connection mattered. The balance shifted over time, but neither side disappeared. This balance required judgment. Not everything could be monetized without consequence. Societies learned this gradually. Through discomfort, through resistance, through adjustment. Some boundaries were tested and pulled back. Others moved and remained. There was no final resolution. Instead, there was ongoing negotiation between abstraction and intimacy. Money played its role in this negotiation by offering consistency. It did not decide what should matter. It simply provided a way to coordinate what people already valued. When values changed, money followed. This responsiveness is often overlooked. Money appears rigid because its rules are precise, but the system around it evolves continuously. Laws change, customs shift, practices adapt. Money itself remains a tool shaped by these movements. It reflects priorities rather than setting them. Over centuries, this reflection created layered meanings. A coin was not just metal. It was trust, authority, labor, and time compressed into a small form. Later, a record was not just ink. It was obligation, memory, and expectation. People learned to live with these layers without unpacking them. Only historians and philosophers paused to trace the path. Most lived within the system, focused on immediate concerns. This focus was practical. Life demands attention. Money works best when it does not compete for it. When exchange fades into routine, people can direct energy elsewhere. That is perhaps why the invention of money feels distant, even though its use is constant. It was not designed to be admired. It was designed to function. From barter to coins, from coins to records, each step reduced friction and increased reach. Each step also introduced new dependencies. People accepted these dependencies because they offered more than they demanded. They offered continuity. Continuity allows planning. Planning allows cooperation. Cooperation allows complexity. Money sits quietly at the center of this chain, rarely noticed, but deeply embedded. As long as people continue to seek ways to coordinate effort across time and distance, some form of money will persist. Its shape will change. Its symbols will shift. Its mechanisms will evolve. But the underlying impulse remains: to exchange without conflict, to remember beyond individual memory, to trust beyond immediate familiarity. These impulses do not fade. They move forward, carried by whatever systems are available, shaping them gently through use rather than design. And so money continues its slow passage through history, not as a destination reached, but as a process ongoing, shaped by countless ordinary actions, sustained by habit, and adjusted quietly whenever the balance between trust and uncertainty requires it. As this process continued, money began to influence how people related to patience. Before money, patience was often imposed by circumstance. Seasons dictated timing. Distance imposed delay. Outcomes could not be rushed. Waiting was part of life, not a choice. With money, waiting became something that could be managed. A person could store effort. They could defer use. They could hold value without consuming it immediately. This transformed waiting from passivity into intention. Time became something that could be bridged. This change affected behavior quietly. People learned to postpone satisfaction, to endure present discomfort for future stability. Not always successfully, but often enough to matter. Saving, lending, and investing emerged from this capacity to delay. These behaviors did not appear suddenly. They developed through repetition and observation. People noticed that restraint sometimes led to security. That foresight reduced vulnerability. Money made foresight practical, yet patience was never evenly distributed. Some could afford to wait, others could not. This difference shaped experience deeply. For those living close to necessity, money moved quickly through their hands. For others, it accumulated slowly, extending options. This unevenness was not new, but money made it persistent across time. Still, money did not erase the older rhythms entirely. Seasons remained. Bodies aged. Effort still required energy. Money worked within these limits, not beyond them. It offered flexibility, not escape. As societies aged, they accumulated not only wealth, but memory of past adjustments. Stories of failure and recovery circulated. Rules were written to prevent repetition. Safeguards were introduced. These measures reflected learned caution. Money systems became layered with experience. What once required instinct now required procedure. What once relied on judgment now followed rule. This reduced reliance on individual wisdom, but increased reliance on structure. Structure brought stability. It also brought impersonality. Decisions were made according to criteria rather than circumstance. This was efficient, but sometimes unsatisfying. People learned to distinguish between what was allowed and what felt right. This distinction persists. Money systems operate on permission. Human systems operate on meaning. The two overlap but never fully align. Over time, people learned to move between them, to use money where precision mattered, to rely on other forms of understanding where it did not. This flexibility kept societies functioning. Whenever balance tilted too far toward abstraction, people pushed back. Through custom, through reform, through quiet refusal. Whenever intimacy limited coordination, abstraction returned. Money adjusted to these movements. It did not resist. It adapted. This adaptability is why money endures. Not because it is flawless, but because it absorbs change. It stretches to accommodate new needs. It contracts when trust thins. It reshapes without losing its core function. That core remains simple: to stand between effort and reward, to carry value across time, to allow strangers to cooperate. Everything else is variation. From the earliest barter to the first coins, from coins to records, from records to systems, each step extended reach while testing trust. Each step required acceptance rather than enthusiasm. People rarely celebrated these transitions. They tolerated them, used them, gradually depended on them. Dependence is not weakness. It is coordination. Humans depend on many systems they did not create. Language, roads, measurement, timekeeping. Money belongs among these. It organizes behavior without demanding constant attention. It provides reference points that allow complexity to function. When it works, it is barely noticed. When it falters, it becomes suddenly visible. This visibility reminds people that money is not natural law. It is human agreement. Durable but not inevitable. Strong but not immune. And so it continues, sustained not by certainty but by use. Not by perfection but by adequacy. Not by belief in its ideals but by confidence in its continuity. As long as people continue to exchange, to plan, to wait, and to trust beyond immediacy, money in some form will remain present, quietly adjusting, carrying forward the accumulated intentions of those who came before, and making space for those who will come after. Over time, money also shaped how people understood responsibility. In earlier exchange, responsibility was shared and visible. If something went wrong, the cause was usually close at hand. A failed crop, a broken tool, a missed obligation. Accountability had faces and names. As money-based systems expanded, responsibility spread outward. Many hands contributed to outcomes. Many decisions overlapped. Effects traveled far from causes. A person could act within the rules and still contribute to harm elsewhere, without awareness. This diffusion did not arise from malice. It arose from scale. Scale makes clarity difficult. Money enabled scale by coordinating effort beyond direct knowledge. It allowed people to participate in systems too large to fully comprehend. This participation brought benefits, but also distance. Distance softened personal accountability while strengthening procedural accountability. People learned to rely on rules rather than judgment. If rules were followed, responsibility was considered fulfilled. This approach worked well for consistency, but less well for nuance. Nuance requires closeness. Societies have always balanced these forces. When distance grows too great, trust weakens. When closeness limits reach, opportunity narrows. Money sits between these pressures, mediating rather than resolving them. It does not tell people what to value. It tells them what is permitted. As generations adapted, they developed parallel systems to address what money could not. Ethics, custom, social expectation. These systems operated alongside money, correcting its blind spots when possible. They were imperfect but necessary. Money alone could not define justice. It could measure exchange but not meaning. It could settle accounts but not heal relationships. People learned this through experience. Experience accumulates slowly. It passes through stories rather than rules, through example rather than instruction. Money systems absorb this accumulated wisdom unevenly, reflecting it in law at times, ignoring it at others. Still, the presence of money encouraged reflection on limits. What should be priced? What should not? What can be exchanged freely? What must remain protected? These questions reappeared whenever money approached new domains. There were no final answers, only boundaries drawn, tested, and redrawn. This ongoing negotiation is part of money's history, though rarely recorded as such. Records show laws and reforms, but beneath them lies constant adjustment in daily behavior. People decide quietly how much to rely on money and how much to rely on relationship. These decisions vary by context, culture, and moment. Money adapts to these choices. It remains flexible because it is incomplete, because it requires supplement, because it cannot replace human judgment, only support it. Over long spans of time, this incompleteness has protected societies from total rigidity. When systems strain, people find ways around them. Informal exchange emerges. Trust narrows to smaller circles. Once stability returns, formality rebuilds. Money accommodates this movement. It contracts and expands with social confidence. It becomes more abstract when trust is broad, more tangible when trust is narrow. These shifts are gradual, often unnoticed until after they have occurred. From the first barter to the first coins, from coins to records, from records to layered systems, the pattern repeats. A need arises. A tool emerges. Trust is tested. Habit forms. The tool becomes background. Until the next adjustment. This rhythm does not accelerate easily. It moves at the pace of human adaptation, which is slow. Generations live within systems without redesigning them. Change arrives quietly, through necessity rather than vision. Money's invention followed this path. It was not the result of a single idea, but of countless small accommodations to practical problems. Each accommodation solved one issue and introduced another. Over time, a system formed. That system continues to evolve, not toward perfection, but toward functionality. It persists because it remains useful enough, flexible enough, and familiar enough to support coordination among people who cannot know one another personally. And beneath its forms, beneath its rules and symbols, the same human needs continue to move it forward. The need to exchange, the need to plan, the need to trust beyond immediacy. These needs do not fade. They carry money forward quietly into whatever shape comes next, just as they carried it from barter to coins, and beyond, through the long, unhurried passage of human history. As this long movement continued, money also reshaped how people understood limits. In earlier forms of exchange, limits were obvious. You could only trade what you had. You could only promise what you could remember. Distance, fatigue, and scarcity imposed clear boundaries. Ambition was tempered by immediacy. Money softened these boundaries. It allowed people to act beyond what they could personally oversee, to commit resources they did not physically hold, to plan for outcomes they might never witness. This extension of reach expanded possibility, but it also blurred restraint. Limits became less visible. When boundaries are less visible, they must be managed deliberately. Rules emerge. Accounting appears. Oversight becomes necessary. Not because people change, but because scale demands structure. Money makes scale possible. Structure follows. As structure grows, people interact more with systems than with individuals. They learn procedures. They follow steps. They trust that outcomes will be handled elsewhere. This trust reduces cognitive load. It allows focus on immediate tasks, but it also encourages detachment. Detachment is neither good nor bad by itself. It is a condition of complexity. Large systems cannot function without it. Yet too much detachment weakens responsibility. Too little limits coordination. Societies continually adjust between these extremes. Money participates in this adjustment by serving as a boundary object. It is concrete enough to feel real, abstract enough to travel widely. It anchors action without requiring full understanding. Most people do not need to know how money works in order to use it. They only need confidence that others will accept it. This confidence is fragile but resilient. Fragile because it rests on belief. Resilient because belief is reinforced daily through use. Every ordinary exchange strengthens continuity. Not dramatically, but incrementally. The system does not depend on grand moments. It depends on repetition. Repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates trust. Trust allows extension. Extension invites risk. Risk requires adjustment. This cycle repeats quietly. Over long periods, people develop an intuitive sense of when systems feel stretched. They may not articulate it clearly, but behavior shifts. Caution increases. Commitments shorten. Liquidity becomes valued. These responses are adaptive, not ideological. Money systems register these shifts immediately. They slow or accelerate in response. They do not command behavior. They reflect it. This reflective quality is often misunderstood. Money is blamed for outcomes it merely expresses. It is praised for stability it did not create alone. In reality, it mirrors collective behavior more than it directs it. Understanding this requires distance. Distance reveals that money has never been static. Even in periods that appear stable, small adjustments are always underway. Rules are interpreted. Practices evolve. Exceptions accumulate. Stability is dynamic. It is the result of constant minor correction, not absence of change. From the first metal coins to the layered systems that followed, money has survived because it allows this correction. It bends without breaking. It absorbs stress unevenly, sometimes unfairly, but rarely without response. Response may be delayed. It may be imperfect, but it occurs. People do not tolerate sustained misalignment indefinitely. When systems no longer reflect lived reality, pressure builds. Reform, replacement, or retreat follows. Money adapts because it must. This necessity anchors its history. The invention of money was not an act of control, but of accommodation. People needed a way to exchange beyond memory. They accepted imperfections in exchange for coordination. They still do. Each form of money carries assumptions about trust, authority, and time. These assumptions change slowly. Often they change without conscious acknowledgement. People simply behave differently. Behavior leads. Systems follow. This is why money's story feels continuous even as forms change. The surface evolves, but the underlying movement remains steady. People seek predictability without rigidity. They seek flexibility without chaos. Money occupies this middle space. It does not eliminate uncertainty. It frames it. It does not guarantee cooperation. It enables it. It does not define value. It measures one aspect of it. These limitations are not flaws. They are conditions. As long as humans remain finite, social, and forward-looking, such conditions will persist. Money will continue to exist within them, shaped by use rather than design, altered by necessity rather than intention. And so the passage continues, not toward an endpoint, not toward resolution, but forward slowly, carried by habit, adjusted by experience, and sustained by the quiet, ongoing decision to keep exchanging, to keep trusting just enough, and to keep moving value across time in whatever form is available. As this quiet progression carried on, money also began to influence how people perceived effort. Before standardized exchange, effort was visible. You could see the labor in a woven basket, a carved tool, a harvested field. The result carried the trace of the person who made it. Effort and outcome were closely linked. Money introduced distance between the two. Effort could now be exchanged immediately, while its results appeared elsewhere. A day's work became a number. That number could be used for something entirely unrelated. The connection between action and outcome loosened. This loosening was practical. It allowed specialization. One person could focus on a single task and rely on others for the rest. Skills deepened. Productivity increased. Complexity grew, but visibility declined. People no longer saw the full chain of effort behind what they received. They trusted that money represented it. This trust allowed efficiency, but it also hid strain. Labor became abstract, just as value had. This abstraction changed how people understood fairness and exhaustion. A number could not show fatigue. It could not show danger. It could not show sacrifice. It could only show equivalence within a system. Human experience exceeded what money could capture. Societies learned to live with this gap. Sometimes they tried to close it through regulation. Sometimes through custom. Sometimes through cultural recognition. These efforts acknowledged that money alone could not fully represent effort. Still, money remained central because it was workable. It allowed effort to be exchanged without constant explanation. It freed people from needing to justify every action. It reduced friction in daily life. As long as outcomes felt acceptable, the system held. When outcomes felt disconnected from lived experience, tension emerged. People sensed imbalance even when numbers appeared correct. This sensing was emotional rather than analytical. Emotion plays a quiet role in money. Confidence, hesitation, resentment, relief. These states influence behavior long before they are named. Money systems absorb these shifts through use patterns. Increased saving, reduced spending, shortened commitments. These changes are often subtle. They do not announce themselves. They accumulate quietly until they reshape outcomes. Only later do people look back and assign explanations. This delayed recognition is characteristic of large systems. Individuals feel first. Systems respond later. Money is sensitive to feeling because it depends on willingness. Willingness to accept. Willingness to wait. Willingness to trust that effort exchanged today will be honored tomorrow. This willingness cannot be enforced indefinitely. It must be renewed. Renewal occurs through experience. When exchange works repeatedly, confidence returns. When it fails, caution grows. History shows countless cycles of this renewal. None are identical. Each reflects its time and place, but the underlying pattern remains consistent. Trust expands. Trust contracts. Money follows. From barter to coins, from coins to records, each step increased reach while reducing visibility. Each step traded intimacy for scale. People accepted this because the benefits outweighed the costs most of the time. Most of the time is enough. Money does not need universal approval. It needs sufficient acceptance. It does not need to be loved. It needs to be relied upon. Reliance builds through habit. Habit builds through repetition. Repetition builds through daily necessity. This chain explains why money endures even when criticized. Critique does not disrupt routine. Disruption comes only when routine fails. When routine fails, people respond quickly. They seek alternatives. They simplify. They reduce exposure. They return to what feels tangible. Once stability returns, routine resumes. This movement is not progress or decline. It is adjustment. Money sits within this adjustment, absorbing pressure, redistributing strain, and adapting its forms. It does not resolve human limitation. It manages it. It does not remove uncertainty. It contains it. It does not guarantee fairness. It allows coordination. These modest functions are enough. They have carried money forward from its earliest expressions to its later forms, and they continue to carry it onward, quietly, through the ordinary actions of people exchanging effort, honoring obligation, and trusting just enough in what cannot be fully seen. The story does not conclude. It extends. It moves with human behavior rather than ahead of it, shaped not by grand design, but by countless small accommodations made in response to everyday needs, repeating slowly, patiently, across time. As this movement continued, money also shaped how people understood security. In earlier times, security was tangible. Food stored, tools maintained, shelter reinforced. Safety was something you could see and touch. Loss was immediate and visible. Money introduced a different kind of security. Value could now be stored without taking physical form. A portion of effort could be set aside, not as grain or livestock, but as a symbol accepted by others. This symbol promised access rather than possession. Security became conditional. It depended on continuity, on systems holding, on others honoring the same agreement. This kind of security was lighter to carry, but heavier to trust. People adapted to this trade. They learned to feel safe without seeing everything they depended on. They accepted that protection could exist in records, promises, and shared expectation. This acceptance was gradual. It developed through experience rather than argument. When the promise held, confidence grew. When it wavered, attention returned to what could be controlled directly. The balance between stored value and immediate provision shifted constantly, guided by circumstance rather than doctrine. Money allowed this balance to move fluidly. It did not replace older forms of security. It supplemented them. Food was still stored. Shelter still mattered. Community still provided support. Money layered over these foundations rather than erasing them. Over time, however, layers accumulated. Security became distributed across systems. Part tangible, part abstract, part personal, part institutional. This distribution reduced vulnerability to single failures, but increased dependence on coordination. Coordination requires trust. Trust, in turn, requires predictability. Money systems strive to provide this predictability through rules and repetition. When rules remain stable and repetition continues, confidence settles in quietly. People stop thinking about security and focus on living. This quiet confidence is fragile, but it is also self-reinforcing. When people feel secure, they behave cooperatively. Cooperation strengthens systems. Strong systems reinforce security. The cycle continues until disrupted. Disruption always arrives eventually, not as an exception, but as part of history's rhythm. Weather changes. Leadership changes. Resources shift. No system escapes pressure indefinitely. Money absorbs pressure unevenly. Some feel it immediately, others later. Some are protected, others exposed. These differences shape perception of stability. Perception matters. Two people can live within the same system and experience it differently. One feels secure, another feels precarious. Both responses are valid within their circumstances. Money does not equalize experience. It standardizes exchange. This distinction is important. Standardization allows coordination, but it cannot account for individual reality. Societies attempt to address this gap through additional structures. Support systems, protections, adjustments. These efforts evolve alongside money, not outside it. They respond to what money cannot resolve alone. As systems matured, people grew accustomed to layered responsibility. Personal responsibility remained, but institutional responsibility expanded. When outcomes were uncertain, blame became diffuse. Diffuse responsibility reduces conflict, but also clarity. Clarity returns only when limits are reached. At those moments, attention sharpens. People reassess assumptions. They look again at foundations that had faded from view. Money becomes visible once more, not as background, but as structure. After reassessment, routine returns. This cycle repeats not because people forget, but because forgetting is necessary for complexity. Constant vigilance would paralyze action. Trust requires selective attention. Money enables this selective attention. It allows people to focus on immediate concerns while assuming continuity elsewhere. This assumption is not naive. It is pragmatic. Most of the time, continuity holds. Enough of the time, at least. This enough sustains systems across generations. Not perfection, not certainty, adequacy. Money persists because it is adequate. Adequate to carry effort forward. Adequate to bridge time. Adequate to allow strangers to coordinate. These modest achievements accumulate into large effects over centuries. They reshape settlement patterns. They influence institutions. They alter how people think about tomorrow, yet they do so quietly. Money does not demand reflection. It tolerates neglect. It functions in the background until pressure brings it forward again. This background role is its strength. From the earliest exchanges to the more structured forms that followed, money has remained a companion rather than a centerpiece. It moves alongside human activity, shaped by it, responding to it, never fully directing it. Its story is inseparable from human adaptation. As long as people continue to seek security beyond immediacy, to store effort beyond the present moment, and to trust systems enough to act within them, money in some form will remain present. Not as an end point, not as a solution, but as a continuing accommodation to the limits and possibilities of human cooperation, unfolding slowly, without resolution, carried forward by ordinary actions repeated across time. As this accommodation continued, money also influenced how people understood loss. In earlier forms of exchange, loss was concrete. A tool broke, food spoiled, livestock died. The cause was often clear and the response immediate. Recovery depended on labor and time. With money, loss became more abstract. Value could disappear without visible damage. A record could change. An agreement could fail. A promise could dissolve. The loss was real, but its source harder to grasp. This abstraction altered emotional response. People learned to feel absence without seeing destruction. Anxiety shifted from physical lack to uncertainty about continuity. Trust became part of resilience. Resilience itself changed meaning. Before, resilience meant endurance of hardship. With money, it also meant flexibility. The ability to adjust plans, to redirect efforts, to absorb setbacks without collapse. Money supported this flexibility by allowing value to move. Loss in one area could be offset by stability in another. Effort could be reallocated. Time could be repurposed. This adaptability reduced the finality of many failures, but it also softened lessons. When loss is buffered, its cause may remain unexamined. When recovery is possible without understanding, repetition becomes likely. Societies oscillate between caution and confidence, learning and forgetting. Money does not enforce memory. It enables recovery. Recovery is necessary, but it can obscure origin. Over time, people learned to accept this trade. They valued the ability to continue more than the clarity of cause. Systems evolved to prioritize continuity over explanation. Explanation remained important, but secondary. This prioritization shaped institutions. Systems were designed to keep functioning under strain, to absorb shocks, to redistribute impact. Not always fairly, but consistently. Consistency matters. People can adapt to hardship if it is predictable. Unpredictability erodes trust faster than difficulty. Money systems strive to reduce unpredictability, even when they cannot remove hardship. This effort underlies many adjustments across history. Rules are clarified, procedures standardized, exceptions formalized. These measures aim to stabilize expectation rather than outcome. Money stabilizes expectation. It tells people what is likely, not what is guaranteed. This distinction is subtle but important. When expectations align with experience, trust holds. When they diverge, tension builds. Money reflects this alignment through behavior. Spending slows or accelerates. Commitments lengthen or shorten. Saving increases or decreases. These shifts occur before formal acknowledgement. They are signals embedded in routine. Institutions respond after. This lag is inherent. Large systems move slowly. Individual behavior moves quickly. Money sits between them, translating one into the other over time. This translation is imperfect but functional. It allows adaptation without constant disruption. From the earliest coins to more abstract forms, money has served as a buffer between immediate experience and long-term structure. It absorbs shock, delays consequence, and spreads impact. These functions support stability, but they also distribute responsibility. Responsibility becomes shared, then diffuse. People act within systems rather than outside them. Outcomes feel collective, even when actions are individual. This diffusion shapes moral perception. Blame becomes harder to assign. Credit becomes broader. People learn to live with ambiguity. Ambiguity is uncomfortable but manageable. Money does not resolve ambiguity. It organizes around it. It allows action to continue even when understanding is incomplete. This is one of its quiet strengths. Understanding often lags behind necessity. People must act before they fully know. Money allows this by providing a common reference. It reduces the need for constant deliberation. It allows movement. Movement sustains life. Still, movement without reflection can drift. Societies periodically pause, reassess, and adjust. These pauses may be formal or informal, widespread or localized. They restore alignment between expectation and experience. Money participates in these pauses by slowing, tightening, or reconfiguring. After adjustment, movement resumes. This rhythm of movement and pause defines long-term stability. Money does not eliminate cycles. It moderates them. It does not prevent loss. It reframes it.